Welcome to episode 8 of the Gratitude for Time podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to talk with people of power, wealth, or influence about how they value time. My guest today is President and CEO of the California Chamber of Commerce, Jennifer Barrera. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure to be here.
Before I let you take over and start talking about your life, I kind of want to share some context around your position and just your sense of leadership, so people can have a better understanding and appreciation. So as CEO of the California Chamber of Commerce, the state of California is now, I think, the 4th largest economy.
That's right. Just recently moved out.
Yep. And that's something very interesting to talk about in a little bit, I think. The California Chamber represents over 14,000 businesses, to some degree and scale. I think just by nature of your position, you operate on a global scale at the intersection of technology, politics, business, the law, government, international diplomacy, and I think also by nature now, mental health. I would say symbolically, you're a queen of global commerce.
It's going to be my new title.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. They do it in private industries.
That's right. That's right.
Defender of human beings and economic systems is another one. I think that's more personal to your background, kind of probably the way you see things. So yeah, just want to set that context. Is there anything you want to share or add? Just, I guess, kind of how you see yourself playing that role?
No, I think, those two titles are really actually very nice and representative of a lot of the things that I'm involved in and I get to do as a part of this position that I have at Cal Chamber, which I feel very privileged to be able to have this position and be involved in so many different pieces of our California economy, and as you said, that have an international impact as well. But I certainly see myself as basically a top advocate for businesses in California and for our economy, and to protect the well-being and livelihood of so many individuals who work here in California, and to help them continue to achieve the California life that they enjoy. That's all driven and funded by the private sector, which is what I get to represent. So that's another part of it that I see and certainly believe is a part of my position.
Cool. Well, the nice part is that you're also a human.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I think at this point I would just love to start with your life story and kind of where you started or how you came to be here at this point in time.
Yeah. So I grew up in a very, very small town northeast of Bakersfield, California, which obviously is in the Central Valley, but the town I grew up in was northeast, about an hour and a half, and only had about 10,000 people total. So very small. Everyone knew each other. I think my graduating class from high school had 100 individuals in it, so we certainly knew each other very well. Mm-hmm. My parents were both educators. I had 3 older sisters, and the small town was unique in that Bakersfield was basically the big city, which is funny to some when I say that now, because when you think of Bakersfield, you don't necessarily think of it as a big city. But to me and my family and everybody who grew up in that valley, it was kind of the big city, and we would often go to Bakersfield to do things like shopping, going to a movie, which weren't things that we had in the small town. It was a big deal when there was a stoplight put into our town when I was in high school. That didn't happen. We only had stop signs before.
Wow.
And so a stoplight was just like this big moment that we were kind of like, moving into a bigger town. There was a McDonald's that was put in when I was in high school. We didn't have any fast food in the town before. So all of these things that you think of now that are just common issues were things that weren't the norm in the town that I grew up in. And I very much, my parents were both educators. They certainly taught us at a very young age and continued just to, remind us that education was key to success. And there was no question in our household about whether or not you're going to go to college. It was just a given that college was absolutely the path we were going to go down. And so it was never a question to me that I was going to continue and go to college after high school, which wasn't necessarily the norm in the small town I grew up in. A lot of people just found jobs in the local stores, economy, and kind of stayed in the small town. But again, all of my sisters and I knew that college was absolutely what we were going to do. And so we went to the big city of Bakersfield after high school and went to college. And I attended a community college. And then I went to Cal State Bakersfield, which is where I got my bachelor's from. And I think, I never had an idea necessarily of what I wanted to do. I just assumed that I was going to be a teacher because that's what my parents did. They were involved in education, and that's what I grew up knowing was education and being a teacher. One of my older sisters, she actually became a teacher, and so again, I kind of just felt like that was the norm. I graduated from Cal State Bakersfield with an English degree, and the summer before I graduated from Cal State Bakersfield, a girlfriend and I actually went to Hawaii for about a month. My dad thought it would be like a great opportunity for us to go and kind of live on our own for a month in Hawaii. Stayed in some student housing that obviously was vacant because all the students had gone back home for the summer. And a girlfriend and I went out there for about a month, 6 weeks, to the North Shore of Oahu and hung out for 6 weeks. Well, the problem is that I didn't want to come back from Hawaii after I'd been there for 6 weeks. And so I actually ended up, after undergrad, moving to Hawaii for about a year and a half or so. And I went to, college out there in Hawaii to get my teaching credential.
Which island?
Oahu, the North Shore of Oahu. Worked at a restaurant on the border of Waikiki, and kind of just enjoyed life and hung out, and had a little bit of independence from California, from the family, because I was obviously in Hawaii, and started again my teaching credential where I was doing student teaching. And I actually got an assignment where a long-term sub assignment because a teacher had gone out and they needed somebody to fill in. And I was a long-term sub for, I think, if I remember, it was like 2 months with fifth graders.
Wow.
And I quickly learned that teachers are some of the most patient people that exist. They have just a refined skill set that I did not have. And I quickly knew when I was teaching that this isn't something that I can do long-term. I'm not set out for this. I don't have the patience for this. And maybe it was the age group, but it wasn't something that I enjoyed really on a day-to-day basis. It just wasn't in my skill set. And so at that point, I decided that I'm not going to be a teacher. I'm not going down this pathway to be get my credential. And I was kind of in Hawaii, just waitressing, hanging out, going to the beach, which is wonderful and lovely. But my dad at some point was basically saying, okay, like, what are you going to do with, your life basically and your education? You can't just stay on the North Shore of Hawaii forever and hang out. You need to do something. I know, why not, right? Now I think back and I was like, why not? So he encouraged me. He always wanted me to go to law school. He always thought that would be a good fit. And so he basically said, in relation to time, Jen, 3 years, which is law school, 3 years is going to go by regardless of whether you go to law school or you don't. That's not going to change. What's going to change is what you do in those 3 years. And so why not try law school and see if it fits? And so I kind of, just decided, all right, why not? I'll take the LSAT. I, took a course to study for the LSAT, did fairly well on the LSAT, and I was in the springtime basically. And the way college, or at least law school goes, it's similar to any college or university kind of application. You usually apply in the fall and then wait to hear back from law schools as to whether you got in the spring. Well, I was obviously way behind on schedule with regards to that. I took the LSAT in the spring and I was kind of like, okay, do I have to wait basically a year and a half? And again, my dad was like, well, you did pretty good on the LSAT. Why don't you just check in with some schools in California for law school and see if they have any spaces open? And my criteria, again, at the time was not necessarily focused on academics, but on location. I wanted to be somewhere near the beach is what my criteria was, which definitely limited my options for school. And I basically kind of reached out to Pepperdine, Cal Western down in San Diego, and USD down in San Diego. And Cal Western had a spot open and they offered me a scholarship. And so I was like, okay. And they said, you can start in August.
Wow.
So that was it. And I was like, all right, fine. I'll go to law school.
Okay, as long as it's down there.
Yeah, why not? And started law school, just a few short months later, moving from Hawaii to San Diego. And it was honestly one of the best decisions that I made. I instantly started law school and it just clicked. I liked all the courses. I enjoyed the lectures. I enjoyed the material. I really kind of enjoyed the intellectual discussions going on. It was just instantly I knew like this is the right decision that I made.
It's making me think of like Legally Blonde.
Right?
That movie.
Yes, yes.
That's so funny.
Yes. No, it's funny. It's like one day you wake up and you decide you're going to go to law school kind of thing. Yes.
And you do well.
It's interesting, and like I didn't love practicing law right off the bat as much as I liked law school. It's not the same. Everybody, talks about how law school isn't really practicing law. It's more of the academic part of it. But it just didn't, ever dawn on me as to that it wouldn't necessarily be the same as law school. I don't know why that was such a hard concept for me to think of at the time. And everybody asks you, well, what are you going to do with your law degree? And again, kind of the whole idea was like, you're going to go do litigation, you're going to go do litigation. And I didn't know anything else other than, of course, you're going to go do litigation. I had a summer intern with a litigation firm. And so automatically I was like, yeah, I get a job in litigation and I go do litigation. Around that time as well, my mom had been diagnosed with cancer, and so she was sick as well. And so there was some type of, I was a first year practicing law. My mom was sick, so I was going to, spend time with her at home and take care of her when she was suffering from the illness. And so it was just a really chaotic time. And at the same time, my now husband I was dating had gotten a job up in Sacramento, and so I was also traveling to see him, traveling to see my mom, trying to do first year litigation. It just wasn't great. It wasn't necessarily a great experience, and I wasn't thriving kind of in the position. And so again, making a decision about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be, it wasn't fitting what I needed. And so I ultimately decided to move to Sacramento, where my now husband was located. We got engaged. And then I was a little bit closer to my mom as well, Sacramento, about the same driving distance, but a little bit easier to get to her in Bakersfield.
Yep.
Moved to Sacramento, got a job with a labor and employment defense litigation firm here in Sacramento, and loved it. I loved the subject matter. I loved the firm. The people I worked with were fantastic. I got married during that time, obviously, and while I was working at the firm, I had my son. And my mom also during that time, unfortunately, had passed away from the cancer. And so again, kind of just the time and looking at that and then having my son very close in that time, it just starts changing your idea of what you want out of life and what you want to do. It puts things in a different perspective. So I I liked the firm, I liked the people, I liked the subject matter, but the daily grind of litigation was starting to get to me. And the billable hour requirement was starting to get to me. And at that, I had a second child, my daughter, while I was at the firm. And I very clearly recall she was a young child. She was baby. I want to say maybe 6 months or a year old. My son, a few years older. But I was working on a motion for summary judgment at the law firm, which is just, a huge motion. It costs a lot of money to put together. It's obviously definitive and can end a case if you're successful on it. So it's a big deal. And my daughter was sick. And we had, I had put her to bed, and I was working obviously late into the night knowing I needed to finish this motion because the deadline was the next day. And she kept waking up. And my husband was trying to help her, but she didn't want my husband. She wanted her mom. So I remember just sitting on the floor of my office at home, like holding my daughter. And we're both like crying. She's crying because she doesn't feel good. I'm crying because I'm stressed out that I have this motion that I have to get done the next day. And there's no, it's a
deadline.
Yeah, it's a deadline. You can't just blow it. And it's such a huge motion. And so in that point, I just knew like I needed to get out of litigation, that I didn't want to spend my time billing hours. I didn't want to deal with this kind of stress of this calendar. I wanted to have more flexibility so I could spend more time with my kids. And a girlfriend of mine at the time was very, we would often talk about it because she was a mom as well. And we'd often talk about how hard it was to balance having kids and kind of being in this environment, this litigation environment. And she said, you know, you really should look into a lobbying position. Like, you can still use your legal degree. It's a great job with more flexibility. She knew people in the lobbying industry, and she said you should really look into it. And I kind of, you know, blew it off. I didn't know what a lobbyist was. I really had no idea of how the legislative process worked. But eventually, like a few months later, there was a job posting from Cal Chamber where they wanted a labor and employment attorney, which is what I was doing, with at least 5 years of experience in litigation. And they said, it was exactly like my criteria, like it checked every box. And they wanted to hire for a lobbyist position. And so I was like, okay, I'll throw my name in the hat and see what happens. Like, the punchline obviously is, you know, I got hired, but I, you know, went in for the interview, and again, didn't really know much about the whole process, but I knew labor and employment. And so my former boss who hired me just said, we're going to take a chance on you. And it was kind of one of their first steps towards hiring an attorney practicing in that specific policy area and teaching them how to be a lobbyist, because they already had the policy knowledge. And it just, again, it was kind of like law school. It just fit. Like, once I started doing it, I really enjoyed it. It was a steep learning curve, obviously, my first year as a lobbyist, because I didn't know the legislative process at all. But I knew the policy really well, and that helped. And so I got hired. I loved it. You know, immediately really enjoyed the work, and I just kind of continued to work my way up in the organization year after year, and I've been here now 12 years. And for the last year, I've been the CEO and president, so it's worked out.
That's cool. Yeah.
But that's basically my summary of my life story of how I got here.
That was great. I think that was very valuable for people to hear.
Yeah.
It's very, like, human and very real, the problems, the stress.
Yeah.
I think the uncertainty.
The uncertainty, for sure, but also, you know, making a decision, kind of, again, very relevant to what we're talking about today, is how I wanted to spend my time, and how I wanted to balance my career and my time with my family and my children was my priority. And so I decided that I would basically leave behind my legal career, so I thought, in litigation, because it wasn't what I wanted to, how I wanted to spend my time.
I love that. Just kind of going off what you've said, what do you think is, like, the difference between studying law in law school, practicing, and then being a lobbyist? Like,
what is the relation between all three?
Yeah.
Well, I often, like, have said, you know, law school tells you how to think about the law, how to apply the law into certain fact patterns. And so law school is very heavy on looking at cases, former cases, to then teach you on how a court interprets the law, precedent, how they made that decision and why, applying kind of the elements of the law to the specific fact pattern. So it's very much, you know, fact-driven, analysis-driven, and it really does kind of shift your way as how you look at things. It's almost a new way of thinking to some aspect. And so that's really what law school does. Litigation is then a lot different. Litigation, certainly you're applying the law to certain fact patterns, and you're evaluating whether or not there was a violation of a particular law, whether or not, you know, damages are at issue, things of that nature. So you're certainly doing some of that, but there's also, you know, all of the different procedural rules that are in place when you practice before a court. There's local rules that you have to be aware of. The deadlines are unforgivable to some extent, and they can cost your client tons of money if you don't meet them. The work environment of a law firm, at least a defense law firm, is the billable hour requirement, where your time is counted in increments of 0.1 tenths, 1/10 of an hour, basically, and you're calculating, you know what I mean, how every minute of your day is spent. You have to record it, because time is money. It's money for the law firm, and it's how you ultimately are compensated for your work. And so that kind of environment is obviously different from and unique from law school. That certainly wasn't a part of it. But it's, you know, unique to a law firm setting, and it's just challenging to live your life by 0.1 increments of time every day. It's challenging. You know, when I transitioned over to being a lobbyist, it was funny because it was hard for me to get out of that mindset of always having to account for my time. You know, when I would go out to lunch, it would be like, oh, I only want to spend 20 minutes at lunch because I need to go back and bill hours and account for that time because that's money I'm not billing, or that's time I'm not billing.
Yeah.
And when I was a lobbyist and people would be like, let's go to lunch and spend an hour at lunch, I'm like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? That's like a waste of time.
Yep.
Like you can't account for that.
You can't account for that.
Who are you going to bill for that? Yeah. So it was just a mindset that I had to transition out. Lobbying is obviously you lose the billable hour requirement. There's more flexibility because of the legislative calendar. It's a little bit more set, and you know when you're going to be super busy, and you know when you're going to have a little bit more flexibility in your schedule because the legislators are out of town, basically back in their districts. But it's also similar with regards to applying the existing law to what the policy is that the legislators are trying to address. You're applying that same analysis that you learned in law school on a particular policy situation, and you know how the law is ultimately going to be interpreted by a court because of the law school experience. And so when they're proposing changes to statutory language, because of the legal background I've had, it's easier for me to see like what the consequences of those changes will be. So they're all certainly related, but the environments in which you operate are very different.
Yeah, I mean, what I heard kind of pretty loudly was in litigation, your time is kind of extracted by the system so that for monetary profit at a higher level.
Yes.
Which is common in most of our systems.
Yeah.
But then as you move to lobbying, it's different timescales that are governing behavior and deadlines and sense of stress.
Right.
It's a different system altogether that comes with.
That's right. Yeah. Different rules, different deadlines.
Even though they're all very interconnected.
That's right. That's right. And there are some hard deadlines in the legislative process, but there's more forgiving deadlines as well in the legislative process than there are in the court system, and understandably so. But it's just a different, like, time-sensitive environment. The two.
Yeah. No, that's what I focus on.
Yeah.
So I I'm glad that you said it. One of the questions I had written down, I mean, it's more philosophical, but how do you relate to the world?
It depends on in what capacity kind of I'm in at that point. And not that, that.
Well, if I'm asking you, I guess, extended over time. So if I'm asking all of those roles kind of simultaneously have to play within each other, and because over time it is simultaneous.
Right.
So I guess given all of those roles, how do you integrate, or how do you relate to the world where you're able to integrate all those roles coherently?
Yes. Well, not perfectly. I will say I don't integrate all the roles perfectly, but what
are some of the roles, by the way?
The roles. So my top priority, of course, is a parent and a spouse, and then, of course, my work as I participate in the work that I do as an employer, but also, as a colleague, friends, sister. What other different roles do I play? Infinite. I mean, I can think of all these different roles that I play, and how do they all work together? Well, it is kind of all based somewhat on time in the priority I give. So now I will say in the role I am in, there's a lot of competing requests on my time, and it's prioritizing a lot of those. And of course, my family at the end of the day will always be the top priority, and so I certainly devote a ton of time to them. But when I'm here and in my role, I also try to be very focused on what I'm doing here. Now that it's not perfect, I will get, as many of my colleagues know, I get FaceTime calls from my kids throughout the day and text messages because in their mind, I'm still just mom and I should be accessible to them at any time.
Which is true.
Which is true. And they are a priority. But, but when I'm here, again, I try to focus my time on what I'm doing and my time to the organization and what our priorities are. And then again, competing time, my free time, so to speak, in the evenings, on the weekends, again, kids' priorities are is my priority. But then friends, and making sure that I'm connecting with my friends and people in the community that I really care about. And there's just, I will say, not enough time in the day to always achieve everything I want to achieve. But it's certainly something that I am more sensitive to and focused on as I play in these different roles.
Yeah, I don't know how mothers find the time to do so many things, because like for me as a guy, I just can't fathom that, one. But also two, like from the time perspective, you have to be so like, your energy levels have to like be good for consistently throughout the years, and your time management in terms of being ruthless with your time. You almost have to be like willing to lay the axe down to cut around and guard your time and manage your time and use it wisely and make sure you're taking care of everybody that you need to take care of.
Yeah, we all have, I mean, we all have priorities in our lives, right? Whether you're a mother or not. But I will certainly say having children and their needs and having to be responsible for them forces you to be a little bit more responsible with your time, because again, there's so many things that need to get done. But everybody has priorities where they're devoting specific time, and if it's a priority, they're going to, you know, figure out a way to get it done and the time to do it.
And it's never hindered you at all, right?
Oh, of course it has.
Oh.
Yeah, there's plenty of times where I haven't gotten it right, you know, the balance or priorities, or, you know, I feel the constant struggle that you hear about parents always with children and being able to have both a career and, you know, be a part of their lives is always the constant balance. And sometimes I probably err on one side too much or the other. I'll miss a soccer game or a volleyball game because I have a meeting at work that I feel like is really important for me to be there, or I'll miss something at work because I feel like it's really important. So it's never perfect, but you know, you try to navigate it as best you can.
Do you feel like our culture, whether it's our globalized business culture or Western culture, encourage or helps you do so, or you have to work against the grain to do everything and succeed? And I mean, when I mean the grain, I mean like larger scale grain, just like our history, our culture, the way things are at the moment, and the direction, and just the general chaos that we just don't know who we are as a species, really. But yeah, do you feel like that's, yeah, I mean, do you feel it's helping, it's hurting, it's sometimes helping, sometimes hurting?
Yeah, I think it's actually getting better than it has in the past. So when I was probably in my first legal job, I certainly felt the pressure and more focus on work, and not really having that that personal balance with my career. And I don't know if that was just me self-imposing it, basically, because I was a first year or second year associate at a new law firm, but I certainly felt like there was much more emphasis put on making your hours work, regardless of whether that means coming in, staying late on the nighttime or working on the weekends. I mean, the whole joke around the law firm environment that they basically come around at 5 or 6 o'clock and hand you a dinner menu, right? So you can pick what you're having for dinner at the office. Isn't necessarily, just made up.
No.
That's certainly encouraged that you're going to spend the time and put the time in for your hours. And certainly on the weekend too, if you're behind on hours or you have work to do, they're expected to go in there on the weekends. I think that was definitely the norm when I was starting out practicing. And then as I shifted to my second law firm, I mean, they still wanted you to bill hours, but I think there was just this better understanding of we all have families and we all, want to figure out how to do both. And so there was a little bit more sensitivity to that. I think actually, in the last 10 years, there has been a better or greater appreciation in our culture and society about the need for this balance, this work-life balance. I think there's just, more people, maybe it's, the younger generation coming into the workforce and valuing that more and putting more of an emphasis on it. But I certainly feel that there's a better appreciation. COVID was terrible. Obviously, we know there's a lot of things negative about COVID, but I think one of the positive things that people found in it is the work-life balance and the desire to be at home more, to be able to pick up their kids from school, to be able to go to school activities more, to have that flexibility in their schedule. And so if anything, silver linings are good that we can point to out of COVID. I think it is a renewed appreciation for that work-life balance. And in my position, I'm seeing that kind of it's sticking. It's not like it's going away just because COVID may be mitigated. We're being able to deal with it better. There's still this demand from the workforce that they're able to have that flexibility. There's still a desire for a better balance in their lives. And the remote work, the hybrid schedules that you hear about are that value kind of being emphasized a little bit more than it was in the past, which is great. And it's a really good thing. I'm very sensitive to it, given my past. In leading our organization, we have a hybrid work schedule because, again, one, the employees want it, but two, I also think it's really important for the personal and private work balance. Everybody at the end of the day is not going to say, I wish I would have spent more time at work. We all know that, right? Yeah. No matter how great organization is, even Cal Chamber, people are going to say, I wish I would have spent it, with my friends. I wish I would have spent more time with my family, et cetera. And so recognizing that and appreciating that people are giving you their time when they come to work each day and valuing that, I think is changing and being more appreciated by employers, which is good.
Yeah, that makes me think of two things. One, I guess there's a demand for control and autonomy of our time, and a respect for our time, I guess, from these systems that employ and influence us. But it also makes me think of my dad and the generation of people that he kind of grew up working with here. Right. Where they were all about work. Right. And their relationship to work was almost that of godliness. It gets you closer to God. And we made this joke yesterday because I found this country song that is literally about this guy singing about working your way to heaven.
Yes.
But now a lot of his friends and him, they have more than enough money to retire and not work, but they don't know what to do with their time.
Right.
They literally have this relationship where it's, if I'm not working, I'm not bringing value, what am I doing here on this earth?
Right.
And yeah, I think that's a struggle for a lot of, maybe it's baby boomers, but it's even immigrants to wherever. I think people, especially with artificial intelligence, a lot of automation, free time is more and more there, especially at larger scale. And it seems that a lot of people don't know what to do with their free time, or they don't, or it's overwhelming because you kind of have to be trained to do it well.
Right.
So yeah, it kind of just makes me think of all those things, how it's this transition, I guess.
I think that's right. I'm not at the retirement stage yet, but having, talked with people who are entering their retirement, if they don't have a plan, they kind of do feel a little bit overwhelmed with all the amount of time that they have, being, so used to showing up to work and being busy from, your work hours during the week. But I think retirement is one example. I can tell you personally, my son is a senior. He's getting ready, to graduate and go to college, and my daughter is a freshman in high school, and 3-4 years from now she'll be going into college, and my husband and I are both sitting there thinking what are we going to do with our time? So it happens at different stages when you have something that is so time consuming change that it opens it up. But I'm not there yet, so I can't certainly say of how it's going to operate, but it is almost a chance to kind of figure out what other priorities you have that you want to focus your time and energy on outside of work, and your interests that you weren't able to do for many years, because you were, again, focused your time on other priorities. So it's interesting at different stages, but certainly of the retirement stage, I've heard that as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma that I think becomes more and more relevant as we're moving forward in time, just given everything. But yeah, I guess I'll start the transition over to the main question. And so kind of just playing off everything, like how do you value time? And it doesn't have to be just now, but maybe how has it changed over the course of your life, and or what does that question mean to you?
Well, now I certainly have a different perspective at this point in my life on time than I did, obviously, growing up. When I was growing up, the whole stereotype that you think you're going to live forever certainly was true. And I was like, I can do whatever I want, and I have all the time in the world to do anything. I can go sit on a beach in Hawaii for years, and it'll be fine. And I remember, that feeling and that kind of impression of the world that I have time. But as now I'm in this place. I just mentioned my children are both getting older. They're in high school.
Wow.
And looking back on even that, I comment to my husband all the time, like, how did that happen so quickly? Time seemed to go by in just the blink of an eye when they were babies to where they are now. And you just have a different appreciation for how quickly these different periods of your life can go by. We came out of law school, my husband and I, at the same time, and we've both been in our legal careers for, I'm trying to think, almost 20 years. And it's, again, like, oh my gosh, we just graduated, law school. How did it go by so quickly? And so you just kind of start, as I think you're aging, and maybe, again, very stereotypical, but you start having a deeper appreciation for time. Mm-hmm. I think when my mom passed away and my dad, well, she passed away first, it was also a very significant impact where you realize that, time, you may not have as much time as you think you do with certain individuals. When you lose someone close, I think it definitely has an impact on your perspective with regards to how much time you actually have. I certainly thought she was going to live much longer than she did. And when she got sick, it was already a sudden realization that, oh, I have a very finite time with her. And how do you make the most of it? So I think it is, time is extremely valuable to me. I think it's one of the most valuable things somebody can give you is your time. And I am very, very sensitive to being on time to meetings. I feel like it's a sign of respect to some extent that if I'm going to set a meeting time or you set a meeting with me, that I show up on time. If I'm going to be late, I'm very diligent about letting somebody know, what I mean, that I'm going to be late to it, again, out of respect for their time, because they're giving me something that I can't give them back, right? Any physical object I can purchase or I can give back. Money, I can figure out how to interchange that. Time is not something that you can ever get back. And so I do very much feel like it's the most valuable asset we have is your time. And I'm very sensitive to that, and I'm trying very hard to teach my children how to respect time, but they're in the stage where they're like, oh, whatever, if I'm 5 minutes late, it doesn't matter kind of thing. We have all the time in the world. So it's changed over the years, and I'm sure it'll continue to change as I get older, but right now it's definitely a very high value item that I definitely respect.
Do you find that there's ever tension with, like, if there's an international meeting or a meeting with an international delegate or something, because a lot of what you're describing is very Western time.
Yeah.
So you go to Brazil, it's like very normal to show up hours late to a meeting. India, same thing. Like the different cultures determine what, I guess, is accepted in terms of timing, meeting, scheduling, all of that.
Right.
Even the train systems. It's actually a really beautiful history of time synchronization and international agreement. And I guess also a beautiful display of, like, how differently they can be run. And I guess it's also like a history of power and interest governing. I'm not exactly sure where I was going with that, but yeah, no, it just makes me think of the different cultures we have and how, human behavior is largely determined by how the culture determines the value of time, or the cultural practices around time.
Right.
Even history is a cultural practice of demarcating time.
Right.
And there's a really, really funny comedy sketch that I'll have to show you, but it's with like Nancy Pelosi talking about like history and time, and it's like it's a funny video where I think Chuck Schumer's in the back and he's just falling asleep. And it's really funny. But yeah, I just want to thank you again for your time. I think people being able to hear just how you think about things, how you think about life and the world, how you've kind of grown up over time and
Right.
Made your decisions, and it's really valuable, not just to women, but I think to everybody. And I think just given your natural position, you are like standing out in front, you know. And California to me is probably more of a global leader than America in terms of image.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure when I travel, I never tell people I'm American. I just tell them I'm Californian, and you always get a positive response. I'm serious.
Yeah, California is amazing. I mean, there's so many things that are just outstanding about the state and what it's done. It's obviously strength in the economy, or as a global leader in the economy with its GDP growth, and just, you know, the size of California, the number of people who live here, the diversity in our resources and our industries and the people. Those are all huge benefits for California that you just don't see in other parts of the state necessarily, or that kind of diversity in other parts of the world. And so it's just a unique place for sure. We definitely have our policy challenges, which are what we are engaged in all the time to make it better. But there's so many redeeming things about California that just make it unique and kind of the powerhouse that it is internationally, and certainly in the United States. Yeah, so I'm definitely proud to be able to be the business advocate for such an amazing place.